the Madman! Welcome to the March of the Lich King star ratings for all the classes other than Death Knight. We got a video for just the Death Knight because they're all special in this expansion. And you're going to be shocked by how fast I go because we're going to go from weakest, in my opinion, to strongest. By the way, Death Knight is number 2, which means there's actually a class that I think made out better than Death Knight. Joint worst class of this set, it's Warlock and it's Shaman. I think I'm gonna begin with Warlock because it's more embarrassing. Warlock has one card that I think is good, Scourge Supplies, 3 stars. If you're playing a control deck or like a discard deck, Scourge Supplies is a really good card, 3 mana, draw 3, discard 1, that's far stronger than draw 2. But the problem is Warlock may not actually need that because between Imp Lock, spending 2 mana to draw 4 cards, and Control Lock, just having life tap anyways, not sure you even need this. You got the other stuff if you want the, the greater detail about how ridiculous this entire package is and how useless it is, watch a previous video. But essentially the expansion set the Warlocks up to discard a big undead into slime and then try to activate the death rattle of slime with Shallow Grave, and I just think it's not going to work. There's not good big undead. This is an archetype that doesn't have one really important component of it, unlike old Cube Block. What it's missing is good big undead. Also tied for weakest is Shaman. Shaman got one card that I think is good, Rockgill, 3 stars. I think this card may see play in the Murloc control decks. It is actually pretty strong when played, but it is pretty heavy in cost and it relies on already having a board, so I'm not entirely sure that it will be played despite it being both an undead and a Murloc. Shaman got 2 packages. One is the play a Scourge Troll and then try to put these aura spell buff enchantments onto those with death rattles. It's really slow. If you get locked down, for example, you get matched up against Freeze, Frost, Death Knight, your guys might not die because they're frozen. You don't actually cause your stuff to die normally, so if you're up against a control deck, it's possible you play the Scourge Troll on turn 1, and then you play the Death Weaver aura on it turn 2, and you're like, haha, such value, and then your Scourge Troll just keeps surviving and just hits for 1 each turn. It's just, it's very low pressure to control players. The other package is Big Shaman. You got some cards that cost 8, 9, and 10. You got this Prescience card, 4 mana, draw 2, summon 2, 2/3s with taunt. That sounds pretty good until you realize that the payoff isn't that good because you play your big cards and you don't actually win the game. Instead, you just have a strong board presence. Let me tell you, paying 10 mana to get strong board presence doesn't cut it. You want to pay 10 mana to win the game. Overall number 9, we got our Mage. Mage has one really good card. That is Prismatic Elemental, 4 stars. This card is really efficient, 2 mana, 1/3, discover a spell, wow. But that's not it! You even get a 1 mana discount on it, so it's almost like it was a 1 mana, 1/3, discover a spell. But that's not it! You also potentially get to discover a spell with a school that's not usually in the Mage school, which means that when you cast your hero, Dawn Grasp, you're actually going to be able to replay that spell, so you get a double. So it's like a 1 mana 1/3 that casts 2 spells. Wow. Unfortunately, it all goes downhill from there because one of the packages that this Prismatic Elemental goes with is the generate random stuff and then generate even more random stuff package, which appears to be a value deck, which will never work out. You got your Grand Magister Ramith, Arcane Defenders, Energy Shaper, Vast Wisdom. Yeah, all that is trash, 1 star. On the other side, you actually have a combo deck. It's the generate a lot of Arcane Bolts and then fling them at your opponent combo deck. Ultimately, these cards are rated a little bit lower than I usually would. It's because I think there's a playstyle that's stronger than this in 2 different classes actually. One is Frost Death Knight, similar idea, but I think a higher chance of success. It's more of the tempo mage side, less combo-y. If you were wanting to go for combo, I think Priest is better. So what do we got here? We got Arcane Worm, 2 stars, Arc Splitter, 2 stars, Vexillus, 2 stars, Arcane Bolt, 1 star, Magister's Apprentice, 1 star. You don't need the discount from Magister's Apprentice. You don't need to run Arcane Bolt because you'd rather get the Arcane Bolts from the Arcane Worm and the Arc Splitter, and then you play your Vexillus and then you throw all of your Arcane Bolts at the opponent, maybe with some spell damage, and then, you know, there you go. But unfortunately, it's just fragile. It takes too much time to set up. I think you can do better with other classes. Next, at number 8, we got Warrior. Poor Warrior. A lot of people were a little disgruntled by how weak Warrior was in the last expansion. I'm afraid that they didn't get that much better in this one. But what you really got in Warrior here was a Fire package. Fire Warrior. And while Frenzy Warrior may have had a good showing during the Knights of the Frozen Throne cards coming back, those Knights of the Frozen Throne cards are going to rotate out, and one of the enablers for it will rotate out, which dealt damage to all of your minions. Now instead you get Sun Fury Champion, which will deal damage to all of your minions if you cast fire spells, which is very specific. Now, to be fair, the fire spells offered here are pretty good. They really are. They really are. But the problem is there's only so many. And the problem is there's only, you know, one way to use the Sun Fury Champion to deal damage to your own minions. Ultimately, I think this will be a package that may not even make it into the Enrage Frenzy Warrior list. So, just listing off the best independent cards. 3 stars, you got Asvedon the Grand Shield and Sun Fury Smithing, which are just really powerful cards. 3/3/3, which plays your opponent's spell. I mean, play that in all your Warrior decks. It's a great card. If Warrior were a stronger class, I would probably give that a 5-star rating, because that card is really strong. But unfortunately, Warrior, I think, is not very strong. Sun Fury Smithing is a very strong card. Great weapon plus great buff. It's just, and it'll fit into most Warrior decks, but I just don't see very many good Warrior decks. I'm going to be tossing all the fire support over at 2 stars. I think this is a little bit of an underrate compared to what other people have been rating this stuff, but I don't see the vision as much. So Sun Fury Champion, which is the enabler, Embers of Strength, which is a, you know, better Thorn Growth Sentinels, Blazing Power, which is a Blessing of Kings for 2 mana, Light of the Phoenix, which is a Arcane Intellect at worst, Disruptive Spellbreaker, which is Disruption Tool against the opponents. Like, all these cards, fairly good. Could slot into this kind of tempo Warrior, but ultimately I just, meh. I'm not even give Thora Bolore, which is the fire synergy payoff, more than 1 star. It's like, did it really need that restriction that I can only come back a certain amount of time? Last Stand, really random addition to Warrior. It's like, okay, 4 mana, draw a card, double taunt. I mean, there's so many other decks that I can get big stuff from. Why here? And Silver Fury Stalwart. Hey, it's the big card that you can draw with taunt. It's really inefficient at 6 mana 4/8. Law Warrior. Next up at number 7, we have Paladin. Paladin actually got 2 really strong cards for their already good archetype, as I'm proud of. Control Paladin, that's the one with the Jailer at the end and all the big cards at the end. Anachronos and Flight of the Bronze, 4 stars on both. These are the start of a Dragon package for Paladin. But the Dragon package isn't actually that good. What's good are that these cards are individually really good. You have Anachronos, which obviously just great removal tool, stalls you until the end where you can play the Jailer and all your other big stuff. And you have Flight of the Bronze, which is actually one of the most insane cards that I've ever seen, and I'm super jealous. All of my control decks want this. I'd love to play this in my Blood Death Knight deck. 1 mana, 5/5, discover a dragon. All it takes is being at turn 7 and onwards. Like, that's super good. The rest can't be said about the rest of the dragons. Daring Drake, Time Warden, this is just not enough payoff. The other package is Aggro Paladin. 2 stars for most of the cards. Sanguine Soldier, Feast and Famine, For Quel'Thalas, Blood Matriarch, Liadrin, Seal of Blood. Those are actually all pretty good cards. All very efficient, all very aggressive. But the main problem is there was no aggressive Paladin, tempo Paladin deck previously. And while, sure, the cards are good, they're not that good that they would push that archetype all the way to the top. And then you got this weird Blood Crusader, which is a 1-star card. Alright, we're getting into the good stuff here. Priest is a really interesting case over at number 6, because I think that with just 2 of these cards being good, it's created a brand new archetype, which I think is tier 1. So these 2 cards alone are what boosts Priest all the way up to number 6, just off of the back of exactly Sister Svalna and Animate Dead. Both 5 stars. The idea is simple. You play your Sister Svalna, you get your spell that can be repeated an infinite amount of times, and it costs 3 mana. With 3 Radiant Elementals in play, you can cast that an infinite amount of times per turn. The idea is eventually you generate enough Animate Deads and you eventually generate enough Void Shards that you just throw enough Void Shards at the opponent that you kill him. While infinite value each turn is pretty good, in case you need to speed it up, you can just play Psyfiend, and you're going to be gaining health a little bit here and there, so while both of your health totals are going to go down, they will hopefully die before you do. What's particularly amazing is that if you generate enough Animate Dead, and you run out of time on a certain turn, you can just continue on the next turn. It's not just generating 1 card each turn. You're generating like 25 cards each turn. And while these cards may not be big impact, you generate enough cards, 25 of them, and you're gonna be able to do something. So that is a new archetype which I think has the potential to be so powerful or so annoying, or both, that it'll get nerfed. Over at 3 stars, we got a Mind Eater. It's good stats for the cost. It's good in Quest Priest. And then over at 1 star, we have all the undead-themed synergy, kind of aggression cards. I just don't think that's going to work. Over at number 5, Druid is getting one of the best 1-drop we've ever seen. 5 stars, Lingering Zombie. Wow. A 1-mana 1/1 that requires opponents to kill it 3 times before it dies. So very, very sticky, really, really good in current token Druid, which is already a pretty good deck. Unfortunately, the rust can't be said about the other zombie undead related cards that came with it. Nerubian Flyer, Wither, Elder Nadox, those are all 1 star. Druid also got a little bit of an armor synergy theme. And some of these are good just because they're independently good. They already go into the current Druid deck as opposed to need to work together. You've got a Nubricon, 4 stars. It goes into current Celestial Alignment decks because you play the Celestial Alignment, you play a Nubricon, and then you've got 8 armor to spend on your 1 mana minions, and you can play like essentially all of them for free. Where it really has the synergy that was intended is with Chitinous Plating, Underking, and Crypt Keeper. I'm giving all of those 2 stars. They're generally good with armor. Chitinous Plating could be good enough in Ramp Druid just because it's 2 mana, gain a bunch of armor. Unending Swarm at 3 stars is a potential add-in in these Ramp Druid heavy decks because you could get a discounted copy of Scales of Onyxia. You cast your Scales of Onyxia first, and then the Unending Swarm will work like Scales of Onyxia. Beetlemancy at 1 star is trash. Over at number 4, you have Hunter. Hunter actually got good tools for a good archetype that it has, Quest Hunter. At 4 stars, we have Ricochet Shot and Conjured Arrow. Hunters got to buff their arcane spells with plus arcane spell damage, and then use their payoffs of Eversong Portal and Conjured Arrow. Unfortunately, the problem is it's really awkward to have exactly 2 payoffs and exactly 3 payees. It's just not enough on either side. So ultimately, they have to be evaluated on how well they fit into the current deck. Conjured Arrow, really good into current Quest Hunter and possibly just into any mid-range hunter in general. It's 2 mana, deal 2, draw 2 after you have 6 mana. Yes, even better when you have arcane spell damage on top of it, or spell damage, but not necessary. 2 mana, draw 2, deal 2 is just good. Ricochet Shot is a 1 mana spell damage, like it deals damage for 1 mana, and that's really good in Quest Hunter. They love cheap spells that deal damage, and that is a decent survivability spell. The cards that like actually buff these cards, they're all like 2-star. Arcane Quiver, Pauldron, Eversong Portal, Silvermoon Farstrider. In general, it is just too much work to line up the cards that buff your arcane spells and your arcane spell lovers. Yes, Eversong Portal's insane when you buff it up with spell damage, but I think that needing to have those 2 cards exactly meet up together, it's tricky, and it's not currently worth it. Like, if you're putting it into Quest Hunter, you need the spells that deal damage in Quest Hunter. You can't weaken it by putting in minions that just buff arcane spells. The Shock Spitter is an interesting way for hunters to go, but ultimately I don't think the tools for that are together yet, so I have to give that only 2 stars. The Scourge Tamer is an interesting value card for hunter, which ultimately I don't think is an archetype as well, but it is a cool card, 2 stars. And unfortunately, as good stats for the cost as both Hope of Quel'Thalas and Keen-Eyed Spotter are, I think Hunter is just not looking for that at the moment. The archetype is not supported, where you're getting mega value and you're going for a late game Hunter build. Over at number 3, we got Demon Hunter. Demon Hunter actually has a very, very strong package. It's the no minion Demon Hunter. 5 stars on all the cards that reward having no minions in your deck. Other than 3 minions, because the Soul Eater's Scythe lets you hide those 3 minions and have them not count. So Soul Eater's Scythe, Deal, Unleash Fel, Marcus Scorn, Feldora Warband. The payoff cards for not having any minions in your deck are just really strong, and the Unleash Fel is in the Fel deck, which, you know, you're hiding Jace. The payoff is worth it. What isn't worth it is this Outcast package. This is a value Demon Hunter attempt, but why go for small value when you could just instead cast a bunch of relics, which grow at a faster value rate than this. So 1 star to Fierce Outsider, Wretched Exile, Feller in the Forgotten, even though that card is so much value. It's Vengeful Walloper and Brutal Analan, 1 star as well. They're big cards, they're big demons potentially, and I don't think there is a big Demon Hunter build that's anywhere near sensible at the moment. Number 2 is Death Knight. We got our own card review on that. Number 1, with one of the highest average ratings of all time, Concoction Rogue is so strong. All the cards that generate concoctions are good value for the cost. It turns out that playing a bunch of stuff that's good value for the cost together makes for a good tempo deck. You have Concoctor, Potion Belt, Ghoulish Alchemist, Potion Master Putricide, Vile Apothecary, and we're going to even include Shadow of Demise here as part of the package. These all generate concoctions. They're all efficiently valued. Potion Master Putricide is especially gross as a concoction generator because it's good stats for the cost and it generates, you know, possibly 3 or 4 concoctions the turn you play it. It's simple. You slide this package into a good rogue deck. Could be Thief Rogue, could be Death Rattle Rogue, could be Secret Rogue, and you're gonna do well. I actually think the undead angle is quite good. Scourge Illusionist, which is undead, and Noxious Infiltrator, which goes off of undead. These are both very good cards as well. Scourge Illusionist 5 star. I think that Scourge Illusionist is such a strong card that you should run a Death Rattle package along with your Concoction package, along with your Undead package. Noxious Infiltrator 4 star, because I don't think that Concoction Rogue will necessarily run the Infiltrator, but I personally think it's the right choice to make. Ghostly Strike. That card is just a very efficient, very good card that will be a card that all rogues are going to want, as long as you have the deck space for it. It's just really, really strong filler. It's like the filler that you want to put in your deck, but if you don't have enough room, like maybe you leave it out, but you want to put that into your deck. 1 mana, deal 1, draw a card, that's just really good. And you got Rotten Rodent, no one likes you. But the other 9 cards, what an amazing lineup for Rogue. Value Rogue, it's finally here. Really, for real. On the neutral list, this should go quite quick. We'll start with all the 1-star cards that didn't quite make it for whatever reason. And I think I should just say overall, which will cover a lot of these cards, overall, I don't think Undead was a particularly strong tribe, and a lot of the classes that relied on having Undead synergy, they didn't get the baseline strong Undead minions, which is why all of these Undead over here at 1 star are where they are. Banshee Infected Peasant, Umbralgeist, Vrykul Necrolite, Boneflinger, Scourge Rager, Brittle Skin Zombie, Drakari Embalmer, Plague Spreader, Infectious Ghoul, Shatterskin Gargoyle, Flesh Behemoth. I decided to name them all by name anyways, it goes fast. The other cards are just generally not good enough because they're in the, this is a arena card category, or there's currently a better card for the purpose category. Silver Moon, Arcanist, Bloody Knight, Enchanter, Crystal Broker, Silver Moon Armor, Sanctum Spellbender, Translocation Instructor, Tenacious, Sandlane, and the Sunwell. We'll just generally lump that into arena, reasonable stats, but don't really fit into any deck and do anything particularly well. They're not particularly unfair, they're just like slightly good stats for the cost, but not by enough to justify being in a deck. Over in 2-star land, Foul Egg is an interesting undead, which actually does potentially bring up some undead strategies. You buff the egg, you get a decent reward. But ultimately, I don't think any decks will go for that because the other support for it wasn't quite there. Coroner, it's a reasonable silence option. Silver Moon Sentinel, it's a reasonable control option at the end. None of my decks actually used it, and this card might not actually see that much experimentation, but it is good stats for the cost. It's like better than the 1-star arena level of good stats for the cost. This card is actually really good. In arena, it's insane, so therefore in standard, it might like actually have a chance. Sunfury Clergy, you know, a card that maybe decks that lack healing would consider. Amber Whelp, the dragon deck is not going to work for Paladin, but if it did work, Amber Whelp would certainly be in there. Street Sweeper, I don't think any deck actually needs a 4-mana Consecration. Like, I don't think any class really wants it, even with a 2/2 added onto it, but it's there. Bone Lord Frost Whisper, I don't think any combo deck actually wants the Frost Whisper at the moment, and it's very tricky to run Frost Whisper because if your deck needs Frost Whisper to go off on a combo, then you're very vulnerable to disruption. And if your deck doesn't need Bone Lord Frost Whisper to go off, why do you have Bone Lord Frost Whisper? So it's that kind of paradoxical combo enabler. Orthamar Theron is really slow, but a lot of value. So if the format was ever that slow, has potential. At 4 stars, we have Arms Dealer, which I think is a good turn 1 drop for the Unholy Death Knight. Also for any other undead aggressive decks, which I currently don't see any of, but, you know, in case there is, I think they'll run Arms Dealer. And in Corporal, I'm giving 4 stars just because it's 2 mana 5/5 and a great tool for control decks. It's good minion to play to slowly deal 5 damage for 2 mana and have a nice proactive play they can play early. And at 5 stars, we've actually got the neutral cards that will slot into decks. Astalor Bloodsword will slot into value decks, Renathal decks, decks with Brand Bronzebeard, most decks with Denathrius. Good amount of damage at the end. Nerubian Vizier slots into all the Death Knight decks because they will have undead being generated and killed with their button, and they have enough undead to actually justify Nerubian Vizier. And Rogue, I think there's enough undead in Rogue that you can actually run Nerubian Vizier. Hawkstrider Rancher. This card is great in tempo decks, mid-range decks, aggressive decks. It's a must kill for 3 mana and has 5 health. And if they don't kill it, you play some minions and then each of them gets an effective +2/+2 buff, which is quite a lot of buff. And then Invincible, pretty much only for 2 decks, which is again Rogue with Undead and Death Knight's Unholy version. It's really good stats for the cost. It's really, really good when you actually fetch it with your Rogue Death Rattle synergy, because then Invincible only costs 4 mana, which makes it a lot more reasonable to play. So there is your quick rundown of March of the Lich King star ratings.